Hey there, and welcome to another painting video tutorial. My name is Matt, and in this video, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to take you through the process of correcting a pretty poor painting and turning it into something more realistic using linear perspective. Roll that intro. If you are following me on Instagram, you may have seen me painting En Plein Air in downtown Knoxville a few weeks ago. I spent about 2 hours out on the corner of Gay Street and Clinch, taking in the sights of downtown and trying to come up with a good painting to show for it. Most of the time, I kind of like how imperfect my En Plein Air studies are, and my motivation behind them is to learn and grow as an artist, not to complete an amazing finished product. However, something wasn't sitting right with me after this study, so I decided to take it back into the studio and rework it entirely. The first thing I did was draw over it with a dark tone to mark in the changes I was going to make, and boy were there a lot of them. On the day of the study, I mistakenly disregarded linear perspective. With my initial sketch out of line, this caused the entire painting to be out of line. To understand how to fix it, we first need to understand how to create depth. You've seen in past videos how I use color and tone to mimic atmospheric perspective. Well, in this case, I will still follow those practices, but in a scene like this where the furthest elements are still relatively close, using linear perspective is the best way to achieve depth. To do this, we must find first where our vanishing point is. A vanishing point is the point where all lines and vectors in the scene seem to meet. By finding this vanishing point and using it to make your outline, your scene will follow the laws of linear perspective and appear more lifelike, as well as give the viewer a sort of channel to guide the eyes down into the background of the painting. So after establishing my vanishing point, I continue on making changes over the original study. Some may see this as a waste of time. If I'm going to completely disregard the study and paint over it, why not just save the time and complete it all in the studio? I think that painting something en plein air from direct observation not only enhances your painting ability and decision making, but it also gives your paintings more life. For example, that gentleman there, I had a long conversation with throughout the entire painting process, and he offers a vital part of the composition and makes the scene appear more lifelike. Had I not had that conversation with him after I heard him singing on the corner, I maybe wouldn't have realized that including a person in the scene was absolutely vital to grounding it in reality. These are the sort of things that painting en plein air can do that sticking in the studio simply wouldn't get you. Okay, enough rambling. Back to painting. As you can see, I'm not too focused on the detail in these distant buildings. I know I am using small brushes and packing as much as I can in, but for the most part, I'm only concerned with basic shapes, not as much so exact details. The next two buildings, however, are part of what give the street such an iconic Knoxville feel, so this is where I start concerning myself with details. As always, I block in my basic colors first, then add sharper details and highlights over that. The color I'm using here may appear completely white, but it's actually far from it. I'm still graying out my whites until I get into the immediate foreground, saving those sharp highlight and shadows for when you're close up on the subject. I go ahead and add in the Tennessee and American flags, and then paint the different colored dots onto the Hyatt Place sign. The Tennessee Theater gives us one of our focal points in this painting, so it's important to get all the details right. I start with painting in the green undertone of the sign. Then mark in the outline of the sign with a highlight and a shadow. I then note equidistant blocks where the letters will go. Adding white first and then a shadow color, I clean the edges and round out the lettering on the sign. I'll be honest, this was one of the more challenging parts of this piece. I'm a landscape painter at heart, and these sharp straight lines aren't something that I'm quite used to. But I think it still turned out alright nonetheless. Those letters aren't 100% perfect, but I think it adds some character and a more painterly feel to the scene. Next, I add the details onto this marquee underneath the sign. I take note of my light angle and produce an area of higher contrast here on the right. As you can see, through a lot of this demonstration, I'm using a 3/8" ivory dagger from Rosemary and Co. I am floored with the amount of detail you can achieve with this little brush. From sharp points to lines, this thing does it all. If you want to get your hands on these, check out the description below. After finishing out the details on the right buildings, I move on to the sidewalk. I mark in the shadow of the curb and then a mid-tone for the sidewalk itself. Over that, I layer some dark, warm tiles of color. For that color, I'm using primarily burnt umber and quinacridone magenta, allowing the alla prima, or wet into wet technique that I'm using here to brighten that tone layered over the wet gray paint on the sidewalk. Then I mark in these street lamps with a very dark tone for the post and a cool gray for the light themselves. Next comes the street. I block in the entire area with a dark, cool gray, then I layer over that with a warmer highlight to create the illusion of light filtering through the gaps in the buildings. Following the street, I add the yellow center line, mixing two different yellows to represent shadows and highlights. To ground the scene more in reality, I add two parked cars over here on the left. This will serve as a good distraction that can cover up some of those edges in the back that were blocked from my original reference material. Here I'm using mainly a 00 synthetic round with a cool light gray achieved with burnt umber, ultramarine blue, and titanium white. Then I paint the pot that this guy in the foreground will sit on. Using warm highlights and cool shadows, I blend the shape together to create a round feel. Then I layer in some leafy areas and some flowers into the pot to add some color. I block in the main color of this character's shirt and pants, as well as face and arms. Then ever so slightly, I manipulate the tones to create highlights and shadows to give him more character and three-dimensionality. I decide to make his baseball cap red instead of navy as well to add some more contrast. This is something that I love so much about painting, that we get to make all of these little decisions to create a better piece. When I first started, I got really bogged down in the idea that I had to follow the reference material exactly in order for the painting to look right. But in actuality, part of your job as an artist is to make decisions on how to make your painting better, and you get to do whatever it is you want. I think that's really cool. Moving forward, I start to add detail to the stoplight. Here, even though it appears dark, I never dip into any black paint. Everything you see here is mixed using ultramarine blue and burnt umber. I'm allowing myself here, however, to go into the depths of my tonal range and use the darkest colors I have to create the shadows in the stoplight. Then I paint on the color, as well as the little man in the pedestrian walk light. Lastly, I block in the color for the crosswalk using a dull violet and a warmer brown. Then I mark in the planes of where my bricks are going to go and add on those final details. Well, there you have it. That's all for this time. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos like this one coming soon. As always, you can find me on Instagram or Facebook or through my website, artofmatthewkent.com. All of those links are in the description below. Thanks for watching, and happy painting.